First, a quick note about AireOS versus iOS XE. If you remember the architecture lesson, AireOS is typically centralized. iOS XE is not necessarily centralized. It can be converged access or it can be centralized. But the difference between centralized and converged access is where the access point connects. In a converged access solution, the switch is where the controller resides. Okay? So that means there is no intermediate switch between the access points and the tool that is your controller, because the controller itself is within the switch. iOS XE switches can be converged access switches. So, in other words, converged access switches run the iOS XE code. In comparison, in centralized, the access points do not connect directly into the switch that has the controller function, but the controller function is somewhere else in another appliance, which is not the direct point of connection of the access points. That's why we say centralized, because it's not directly where the access connection is. But centralized does not mean AireOS. You could have a 5760 controller, which is running iOS XE, and this one is a centralized controller. All AireOS controllers are centralized because there is no AireOS switch. But in the iOS XE world, you have converged access switches, that's a 3650, 3850, 4500. But you also have a converged access centralized controller. So it's iOS XE. It's converged access because it can work with converged access switches, but the appliance itself, the 5760, is running the iOS XE, and yet it is not a converged access switch. It is a centralized controller. You do not plug access points directly into a 5760. So this module, Module 8, is about centralized solution. So what we say here could be applied to the centralized AireOS controllers, which is very much all the controllers that are in the AireOS, because all of them are centralized. But it could apply also in the iOS XE world to the 5760, which is here again a centralized controller. It would not, of course, apply to the switches iOS XE. So we could have those two together, 5760, along with the AireOS controllers. However, because the interface is slightly different between the iOS XE platform and the AireOS platform, what we're going to do in this module is specifically focus on the AireOS solution. But please keep somewhere in the corner of your mind that what we do here, although we take the AireOS as an example, could probably apply to the centralized side of iOS XE, that is to say to the 5760. But it makes more logical sense for you to learn better that we treat the 5760 along with the iOS XE other controllers, that is to say the switches. So in next module, Module 9, we'll be talking about converged access, and because we'll be looking at the converged access controller interface on the switches, you will see what you would see on the switch, which would be the same as what you would see on the 5760, because 5760 and the switches run the same iOS and therefore have the same interface. So here, we'll talk only about the AireOS as an example of centralized, but please keep in mind that the 5760 could be also included, but it would disrupt you more than anything else because you would be jumping back and forth between different interfaces to show you the same features but with a different look and feel. So let's only take the AireOS as an example to make it simpler in the progression.